Hey folks, in this entry we'll be taking a look at Namor, the anti-villain from Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. Like most compelling antagonists, Namor has nuances to his morality. While his endgame is heinous, the root cause behind his motivation is a noble one, arising out of the desire to protect his people. Ultimately, Namor embodies the reverse of the Golden Rule, seeking to do unto others before they do unto us. But while that sort of thinking is sometimes justified, oftentimes it becomes an avenue for evil. While Talokan might really be at risk from the outside world, Namor's actions are an extreme overreaction. Not to mention that even if he were to arrange a full-scale assault on the rest of the world, he might not be as successful as he thinks. At the end, the obvious solution is presented to him, an alliance with Wakanda to preserve his oceans. Given the ideal outcome of this solution and the relative ease with which it can be obtained, it does lead one to question as to why it has eluded Namor all this time. War is always a terrible choice, as it will inevitably result in casualties on both ends. A reasonable person would only choose it as a last resort when all else fails. But for Namor, he stands out for the fact that all-out war becomes his first choice. This is in spite of the fact that Talokan was still unknown to the rest of the world and was under no immediate threat. Namor's plan to attack the surface world was a rather short-sighted one. It's true that Talokan would be a real superpower that can hold its own, but as we've seen in previous MCU films, there are some heavy hitters in the Avengers who could give him a run for his money. Namor should be aware of other greater powers out there, given that Talokan was also affected by the blip in Infinity War. And even if Talokan's existence was known to the world, it could very well still retain its independence. By virtue of its location deep in the ocean, any foreign invaders would be at a severe disadvantage should they choose to attack. And from its sheer military might, in all likelihood, Talokan would be an independent state that no country would dare to attack, perhaps like one of the militant countries in Korea. Again, partnering with Wakanda to remain hidden was the simple solution, not to mention that Wakanda would serve as a first line of defense for Talokan, which would benefit them all the more. But this solution is not considered by Namor for several reasons, the first of which is his pride, or more specifically, his God complex. By virtue of his remarkable physical traits, Namor is revered as a god among his people. From his perspective, he is immortal, having been alive for centuries combined with a superhuman physiology that has probably left him undefeated in battle. And then add on the fact that he commands what sounds like the most powerful army in the world. In light of all this, we can see how asking for help is beneath him. After all, why should he stoop down to seek assistance from a weaker nation? What kind of god would have to seek help to survive? It would ruin his self-image and the divine perception that Talokan has of him. There is some notion of this at the end, when Namor is criticized by a citizen for his decision to partner with Wakanda. His pride held him back, and it took an act of humiliation in the form of his defeat in combat for him to acknowledge his error. But beyond his pride, Namor is also driven by a certain grief. This grief is somewhat correlated with his love for his mother. For a brief period of time, Namor must have had a good impression of the surface world, given that his mother mourned the previous life she lost, and as per her last wishes, she chose to be buried above. So when Namor heads to the surface and finds a cruel world instead, there is a huge discrepancy. How could this possibly be the place his mother wished to return to? In a sense, he views this as a betrayal against his mother from the surface world, and the horrors of colonization and slavery irrevocably seal his disdain for the world above. Namor's love for his mother cannot be overstated. In a sense, it is what saves his life at the end. When Shuri shows him mercy at the end, he sees his mother in a flashback, causing him to yield. So maybe in some way, Shuri's act of mercy gave him some inkling that his mother would not approve of his actions. The name of Namor itself is a reference to one of his traits, that he is a child without love. Apart from his hatred for the surface world, this applies to him in a general sense as well. In his conversation with Shuri, Namor makes an insightful statement relating to his emotional life. In his own words, he mentions that when you age, as I do, you realize we all lose everyone we love. It's worth noting that Namor says this in somewhat of a depressed and defeated tone, as if he was griping about his curse of immortality. While this was a brief moment, it's likely a significant one. Perhaps in some way, Namor has become cold-hearted and no longer opens himself up to the notion of love, given that it will only be a matter of time before he has to grieve their passing. This cold heart is a key trait of Namor that spills over to his other interactions. It is for this reason that he can be friendly and accommodating to Shuri during her visit, and within a few moments he is seen threatening to kill her while in a conversation with her mother. A recurring theme in the film is that of grief and loss. The film depicts Shuri as a mirror reflection of Namor to a considerable extent. Just like him, she has lost everyone that's dear to her. And if Shuri is resentful against the world and wishes to see it burn, then we can very well conclude that Namor is many times more jaded than her, having lived several lifetimes and experienced far more loss than her. With that in mind, it's clearer to see as to why Namor would so easily resort to all-out war against the surface world. It's not just for protection of his home, it's also a means by which he can vent his inner frustrations out, just like Shuri expressed herself. So broadly speaking, Namor's readiness for all-out conflict arises firstly from his pride, which prohibits him from the obvious solution of partnering with Wakanda. We also have his love for his mother, which is then converted to hatred of the surface world when the home that his mother loved became an avenue of suffering. And thirdly, we have Namor's own inner frustration from his immortality, from seeing all his loved ones pass on while he is left behind. This resentment is then projected onto the surface world, which he already has a low opinion of. So what do you think of Namor from Black Panther Wakanda Forever, folks? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.